Couple of bits of housekeeping notes. We should all be aware of the fire exits, those two doors there. If in the event of a fire alarm, please follow me. Please make sure our phones are on flight safe or silent. And one thing I am particularly bad at, but there are few of us in this room. If you do have any questions or comments, please do grab the mic. It's not that we can't hear what you're saying. It's just that this is being recorded, and if you're trying to watch it at home, it does make it difficult if you're not using the mic. Another warning again that we are filming this seminar. If you do not wish to be shown in this seminar, please do let us know. Right, so now on to the incidents that we've had in tandem. Apologies for those of you that have been in one of the three seminars where I have talked about Skyvault. How many people were in the AFF session this morning? How many people weren't? So apologies to the people that have seen this before. So one of the big changes that we've had in reporting is that through Skyvault, we have now got the function to be able to report online. And this is a massive thing for British Skydiving headquarters. So now, please do not fill in any paper or PDF incident reports. Please fill in one of these incident reports in Skyvault. How do you find these forms? At the moment, you can only access these forms through your DZ's portal. So you have to go and see someone at your PTO, ideally your chief instructor, to be able to fill in one of these forms. The forms pretty much mirror the paper forms, but there have been some changes that we've made, particularly to the injury form. What we've done on the injury form is we've recognised that it is very difficult to classify injuries, particularly using the traditional methods that we have or categories for injuries. And so we've simplified it greatly. There's now 1 to 5 category based on the type of injury that you see, all the way from a bump and scrape injury that probably only required first aid, all the way through to category 5, which is a fatality. I've done a lot of good work with Jake, and I'm quite happy to have feedback from other doctors in the room about exactly how those categories marry up. The other thing that you'll notice on all of these forms now is a box that asks for the likelihood that this incident is going to reoccur. And we very cleverly and deliberately have put this next to the box that asks if there's any action that you've taken. And that's to inspire you to think, actually, is this likely to reoccur? And if it is likely to reoccur, I need to be taking some action now. And I need to be writing it down. And I need to be speaking to my chief instructor, or your chief instructor needs to be thinking, this is something that I need to put a process in place. I need to update a risk assessment, and maybe need to update my SMS. So that's in there deliberately as well. Those two sections, the injury severity and the likelihood of reoccurrence, also helps us in our risk matrix. So some of you might be familiar with this. How many of you have seen any of your risk assessments at your PTO? So you'll notice this risk matrix is present on your risk assessment as well. What it does, it looks at the severity of the injury, so that's why our injury categories are 1 to 5, and then you multiply it by the likelihood of reoccurrence, and you come up with this risk matrix here. And what we do at British Skydiving headquarters is we look at all the incidents that we've received, and we look at the severity of the incident, one, to see have the appropriate actions been taken, but also when we're doing a review of the incidents at the end of the year, injuries, for example, that we do with our medical advisor, but also when we're looking at what topics we want to talk to you about as instructors, that helps us to identify what are the really key topics that we need to be addressing, and what are the really key topics that we need to be, as part of our safety culture, that we need to be engaging instructors, i.e. you, to try and help us to reduce the chances of these incidents occurring again. The other thing that you'll notice when you get your notes for the STC minutes is the incidents resume is going to change to this kind of format, because previously whoever was writing the resume had to put in there what type of canopy it was, what the wind conditions were doing, if it was relevant. It's far easier if we put this in tabular form so that you can quickly see and look for yourselves what kind of trends there are, because that might also, you might identify, particularly people like Josh, Anna, you might identify trends that we've missed. So coming on to the facts and figures for for all of your lesson plans. So, the cost of living crisis continues, but I think the big thing that's hit jumps this year has been the weather. It was absolutely dreadful start to the year, and that's impacted on all jumps. So this year we did 200 and nearly 26,000 descents, compared to traditionally what we've seen over the last few years is 250,000 descents. So we're down slightly on total descents this year. The makeup of those descents, a large portion of those descents are people doing licensed skydives, but following that is the group we're most interested in, is the tandem groups. We trained a total of 46,000 students. That's including tandems, but it's also including category system students. But the largest proportion of the students that we trained were tandem students. In terms of the total tandem descents that we did 49,827 tandem descents. Now, those sharp-eyed amongst you might be thinking, hang on, if we trained 46,000 students, including CAT system and AFF, how come we've done 4,000 or nearly 50,000 tandems? And that's because there's one big PTO that's not recording or not reporting how many tandem students they trained. But we jumped nearly 50,000 tandem students this year. Total injuries, we had a total of 95 injuries. So to your question, Anna, earlier about the incident rates that we've seen there. So we've got a risk of incident that over the years has reduced from 1 in 400, 1 in 300 descents to what has in the past few years been around 1 in 6 up to 1 in 700 descents. But we've seen a dip of that. So we're now back down to an incident every 1 in 500 descents. Malfunctions are fairly steady as well. So we had pretty much the same number of malfunctions this year that we had last year. But you'll notice that our incident rate is slightly higher because we've got those fewer number of jumps. So the incident rate has peaked slightly from a malfunction 1 in every 1,000 jumps to 1 in about 900 descents. So what were the key malfunctions? What were the key incidents that we had? Now, when we look at incidents, we divide the incidents into those relating to packing, i.e. canopy-related incidents, and those that are unrelated to the canopy deployment. Now, there's some quite shocking figures on there, and the first one we're going to talk about in a little bit more depth later, but we had 3 incidents where students were not connected on board the aeroplane, and the aeroplane took off. Now, one of those was deliberate, where an instructor deliberately disconnected a student because the student behind him, their shoe became untied. And they unclipped themselves so that they could reach back and help the student tie their shoelaces. Now, we're not here to judge, but there's clear action following that. Another forgot to attach the student at the top hooks before the aeroplane took off. And the aeroplane took off, and it's only when they got to about 2,000 or 3,000 feet that they noticed that the student wasn't connected. Another one I've got a video of, which I'm going to show you shortly. We had 2 instances of containers opening in drogue fall, and I've got some pictures to highlight that. We've got 2 out-of-sequence deployments. Typically see out-of-sequence deployments on tandem courses. Only one of those was on a tandem course. We had an out-of-sequence deployment because an instructor was distracted when they were messing around, geeking with the camera flyer. We had 2 instances where instructors were unable to pull the drogue release, and that was actually relating to instructors that were jumping next systems. And when they pulled the primary, the drogue didn't release. And it didn't release because of the terrible weather that we've had. I'm going to show you a picture of the next infinity loop. How many instructors here are next rated? So you'll know the infinity loop on the bottom of the next. And if it's wet weather, if the infinity loop is, exactly that, it's frozen. So we had 2 instances on the same lift where the infinity loop was frozen. And we had a drogue entanglement with a videographer, which again is, I've got the video for that. So we'll have a look at that. So let's look at the case study. The first case study we'll look at is the container open in freefall. This happened fairly early on in the season. And this was caused, again, by the infinity loop, and it wasn't manufactured correctly. So during the skydive, the loop failed, and it resulted in a container open in free fall. So can you see there where the fraying is on the loop? So there's an expanded picture of it. So you can see it's come out of the finger trapping. But you notice, can you see the grey bar tacking at the bottom? So the bar tacking didn't extend high enough up the loop to trap the loop. And that's what a loop should look like. So the bar tacking goes all the way up all the way through the finger trapping. So that traps those two ends of those loops. The PTO in question where this happened, when they looked at the loop, they didn't recognise the stitching on the loop. Because the PTO rigger uses a particular set of stitching and a particular stitching pattern when they make the loop. And it turns out, when they looked into it in greater depth, that this was a loop that riggers had in their pockets. They don't know where they got the loop from. When they looked at all the riggers' pockets, they found various different versions of various different loops that they got from God knows anywhere. Packers had moved to different PTOs and stolen infinity loops from wherever they are. So you need to pay attention to the small things. That's one of the findings from this particular incident. Is something as small as an infinity loop can have a great impact on incidents. We had another container open in freefall in the summer. Now last year we invited Stefan to come and talk to us about the Millennium system. You'll remember, how many people were here last year? See the system. Great system, looks fantastic. But it was the Millennium system where we had this particular instance. What we think happened, as the instructor shuffled to the door, as they were shuffling to the door, they dislodged the pin, and on a Millennium system, so those of you familiar with the next century, you'll know that the drogue comes out of the pocket at the base of the container and then goes underneath there, and the 3-ring is in the base of the container. With the Millennium, the 3-ring is at the base of the reserve tray. So when you pack it, it comes over the top of the closing flaps. So what they think happened was, as the instructor moved to the door, she dislodged the pin, so that the pin came through the large ring. So that's the large ring of the 3-ring release system. And then when they deployed the drogue, it was shortly after they deployed the drogue that the container opened in freefall. And Paratech, when they looked into this, and apologies for the quality of these pictures, and you can just see my glasses at the bottom there. This is from a WhatsApp chat I had with Stefan over in Germany. So the best way they could recreate that was to look at this. So those of you that are jumping Millennium containers should be aware this is the proper way that you pack a Millennium container. Those of you that are jumping next now, there is going to become a time when Paratech are no longer making the next century and they're going to move to next Millennium. So although you might be thinking we haven't got any Millenniums, is anybody here from Dunkerswell? So at the moment, you've got 5 at Dunkerswell, or have you only got 2 at the moment? 2 Millenniums, because he's bought 5, hasn't he? Jason's bought 5, my understanding. So this is the correct way of packing the pin. But the other key thing that's critical with the Millennium is, unlike the Century, where there's one closing flap and one closing, there's one tuck tab on the closing flap. On the Millennium, because of the size of the closing flap, because the flap is a lot bigger than on the Century, it has 2 tuck tabs. You can see the 2 tuck tabs there. Again, apologies that it's a really poor quality picture. There are then 2 pockets at the side of the 2 sides tabs, closing flaps, and it's important that when you're closing it, unlike a Century where you just put the 1 tuck tab in, you've got to put the 2 side tabs in as well. And what they think happened at Dunkerswell is that the instructors weren't putting those tabs in, and so as the instructors was moving to the door, that pin was allowed to rotate. If you tuck those tabs in, it stops it from happening, and stops this particular type of malfunction from occurring. Another case study to look at is a camera flyer in the drogue. So this particular instructor was relatively inexperienced, although fairly current. And what we're going to do is we're going to watch this, and then look at what we're going to talk about what we think might have been the causes of this particular incident. So if we're perhaps not to be critical, but maybe look at ways that we ourselves could prevent this from happening to ourselves, what are some of the things that we could do differently to this particular instructor to stop this particular incident from happening to us? Has anybody got any ideas? Sorry, Dane.
Put his visor down.
So the entanglement cleared with the camera flyer, but resulted in a deflated drogue in tow. But luckily, the instructor did the right drills, which are on a next system. Who's the next instructors? Who's brave enough? Same drill on a Frank.
Pull the release.
Wait 6 to 8 seconds in the UK. Wait 6 to 8 seconds. Pull the release. So I think personally, if I was to be critical, I've never been a big fan of people trying to close the visor as they leave the aeroplane.
Yeah.
The most important, your most important job on exit is to fly the exit. And if you're closing the visor, you've lost one of your control surfaces, in my particular opinion. What that's done here, Josh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think closing your visor can also be a really nice signal that you're about to start your key for the camera flyer. As a camera flyer as well, it's close and then start your key. I think he's actually forgotten to close his visor.
Yeah, and I agree. And I did 22 tandems last year because I'm now working for British Skydiving instead of skydiving for a living, which is what I used to. And I have to hold my hand up. On my recurrency jump, I forgot to close the visor, so I closed it as I left in exactly the same way. So I'm not trying to throw stones here because I live in a glass house. We've all caused that. The other thing that I personally would be fairly critical of is the actual presentation.
He's tried to go for his drogue pretty quick.
That was the third point. Yeah, so Dane made the point that he was very quick to the drogue.
As he's left the sill, he's going for it. I mean, what? There, look. He's going for it straight away. He hasn't even presented himself.
And this is often something that you see with fairly inexperienced or certainly uncurrent tandem instructors, that the poor presentation, but certainly the very quick draw. And definitely if you believe, if you haven't seen your camera flyer exiting at the last time, because maybe we can be slightly critical of the camera flyer as well. Did the camera flyer leave slightly late? Possibly.
Camera flyer could have been confused with exit count.
Exactly,
Different
yeah.
instructors, different exit counts.
Yeah, so camera flyer could have been confused by the exit count. Different flyer, you might not be used to jumping with that. But those of you that are here that jump tandem camera should be aware that if you've got the count wrong, rather than leaving at the same time, just give a little bit of an extra second for them to clear before you go. John.
I'm not great at lip reading, but it looks like he exits when he says set. Look again at the exit.
Yeah, well, let's check that out. It's a good observation there, John. Yeah, it was certainly very quickly after the set, so that's a great point.
How does that cause the drogue not to inflate?
So the drogue entangles briefly with the camera flyer, and then you've got all of that bridle that's out there, and the bridle half hitches over the closes off the drogue. We do have I haven't included it. We have got a picture and a video of the drogue afterwards, which I haven't included, but it's quite clear that the bridle is half hitched around the drogue, stopping the inflation. So the disconnected lateral, I'm sure you have all seen the video from, I believe it was Japan, where the instructor didn't connect, and if you haven't, stand by. But we've also had one of these, and this was actually this was a candidate on a tandem course. But again, we're gonna watch the video and then we'll chat about how it happened. So because the candidate was on a tandem course, there's a reason why they exited in that configuration and they don't immediately set the drogue. I'm sure you all remember this jump. And see if you can spot which hook's not attached.
Yeah,
Anybody seen it yet?
right hand side. I think I would have pulled by now, mate.
I'm never going to tandem again.
As a brand new tandem instructor or tandem candidate at this particular time, this candidate was unaware that the lateral had become disconnected.
That disconnects on exit.
Yeah, so what happened in this particular case, because it was a tandem candidate on the course, it is, are you a tandem instructor?
No.
It can be quite difficult, and the student looks quite fairly hefty here. And as you are pushing forwards on the benches, and there was benches in this particular aircraft, as they were moving to the floor, they caught the lateral on the bench, and that disconnected. The reason why we know it happened then and not during any other part as they connected or any other part is because it was a tandem course, and there was a tandem examiner on board.
To make sure they're fully
And
kitted up
part of the
before they go.
process is you get a pre-jump check when you're on the tandem course from the tandem examiner. And the tandem examiner, and I trust the tandem examiner, stated quite unequivocally that they had checked, they'd done a full check on the instructor before they departed. Frankie.
Probably, I assume this happened because of the opening tab that's attached, not the connector itself.
Say that again, sorry, Frank.
There's, I think I saw like these yellow tabs there.
Oh,
to-
the tabs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and they're just aftermarket or so.
yeah, that's a very good, Frank.
think
Could it have perhaps been the tab that was caught? And UPT, do you have let me introduce, if you don't know him already, this is Neil Wilcox from UPT. Very privileged to have the tandem program director from UPT with us today. What's UPT's opinion of tabs on lateral connectors?
Well, let me answer your question with another question. So, how do they come from UPT? With or without them?
Okay, Sigma instructors in the room, put your hands up. Do you know how the lateral connectors come from UPT? Do they come with tabs on, or do riggers put them on?
They
yeah,
come
so
with out, right? So that would be our standpoint on it. We accept that there's a lot that is commercially used, but the reality is that if they come, they don't come from the factory like that. So it's probably wise not to use cheaters, as we would call them in the States.
Okay, thanks for that.
That was the point.
All good, Frank? Okay. And for those of you that haven't seen the very famous incident where the top hooks weren't connected. So I've left this video run through the exit, so it's clear that the top hooks aren't connected. This video is 2 or 3 minutes long, and in my opinion, at no point during the 2 or 3 minutes is the instructor aware that these top hooks are not on.
No, he doesn't.
I mean, the hook's
Include-
in his face. I don't think he even knows that they need
I think she's pointing it out, isn't she?
Yeah,
What's this?
What's the
Student
exactly?
knows.
He moves it out of the way.
Aren't these supposed to be up top? You told me you hooked them up. He hasn't got a clue.
no, thankfully.
Yeah.
Huh?
Thankfully, she's got
He
no
hasn't
clue.
got a clue.
No, she hasn't got a clue.
No, he hasn't.
Oh, he hasn't got a clue,
He
yeah.
hasn't. And I mean, now she's stayed upright.
I mean, Neil, I believe this is not a Sigma rig. Looks like a strong.
Just wait for it. Stand on my feet left. I'm just going to disconnect.
So when we watch these videos, we're all sat there thinking, this will never happen to me. And yet we had 2 incidents where it did happen to them.
No, look. What a knob.
I just realised that. I just thought, look.
It's the PC
He
version.
hasn't. He's trying to put the handle away.
I mean, I think it's remarkable the student's still upright and not leaning forward. I always thought if the top hooks were off, the student would be leaning forwards as well.
Legs are softened up.
And good
Yeah.
job we didn't. Good job we didn't try and release the side straps.
Exactly. I mean, I thought he was looking at the top hooks at that point,
No.
but I certainly wouldn't be geeking and smiling at the camera as he does in a second.
Just so low on it as well.
Mm.
I mean, to be honest, he should be shot. take outside.
It's very
sure.
lucky. Very lucky.
He's very lucky.
There we go. So what are the key takeaways from that? So let's have it from the room. Maybe don't do tandems in Japan, Dane. Yeah.
As this goes out to the live stream.
Yeah.
Rather than it being a takeaway to start off with, is there any more backstory on that? Obviously,
Not that last story. I've got
that
backstory.
One
Obviously.
I'd be really interested to see what action was taken against the individual, because it made its way onto the internet.
Yeah.
Like, we all, most people have probably seen the videos in the past where the tandem instructor starts beating up the student, and there was something happened
I
after
believe
that.
from UPT.
Yeah, but with that, I'd be really interested to see what has happened, who's taking responsibility for it.
Knows, because he's put that on himself for his own ANCAM.
Yeah.
And I don't think he knows, even when he put it out, that it was off.
Yeah.
I think there was an attempt made at a later time to hook it up, and then he just quickly realized that.
Sorry, there was an attempt made to hook it
I
back
think
up.
there was an attempt made to get the hooks in later in the skydive, and he just realized this is not going to work, so he left it with.
Yeah.
I have an identical video from Italy like this. It was actually
great.
put on
Look forward
the
to that
internet
next year, Frank.
for like an action cam advertisement or so. So Bill Booth once said, if you forget the upper ones, it works. If you forget the lower ones, you probably get killed. So tons of guys that.
Brilliant. Keep hold of that, Frank. So pay attention to the small things. So something as small as the infinity loop, or something, stitching on the infinity loop, or even the infinity loop getting wet, can cause incidents. We all know that we should have, as tandem instructors, we should have a process where we check the top hooks. How many times do you check top hooks traditionally, or even the laterals during the? And I'm not going to ask you that question. There's an operations manual answer to that, but you should be doing that far in excess of what the operations manual suggests you should be doing that. And you shouldn't just be checking the laterals, you should be checking all of the handles on a frequent basis. But when you are doing it, have a system for doing it. I have a system where I get on board the aeroplane, hook them up, do my 11-point check. At 5,000 feet, I get this, or 5,000 feet before exit, I tighten the student up, do an 11-point check. Door opens, goggles go down, I do an 11-point check. So whatever you choose to do, at your own process, have a system, have a process, and that's going to stop you from making mistakes. And it's usually when you're taken out of that process that you make a mistake, like forgetting to check top hooks, particularly as you're getting on board the aeroplane. The largest cause of top hooks being disconnected, I believe, is the one in the middle thing. So how many people here jump caravans? So you get on board the caravan with bench seats, you're just in the process of hooking up, and you hear the immortal words, one in the middle. And the smallest person on board the aeroplane gets all disgruntled, has to get past all the grumpy old tandem instructors. You move over, just as you're attaching the top hooks, you're helping this person get their restraint, all the rest of it. Sit down, aeroplane takes off, and before you know it, you've forgotten to attach your top hooks. So when we teach you, when we're doing B license stuff, if you're doing flight line checks and you get disturbed, what do? Start again, and it's exactly the same when we're doing our 11-point check. If you get disturbed, start again. It's clear that the person that was had the drogue entanglement could probably do some work on his exits as well. How many people here look at videos of them skydiving? I do it all the time. I love seeing myself on video, but you should be doing it in mind of reviewing your performance, not only during the skydive, but also on exit as well. And effectively communicate with your camera flyer. It's such a little detail that the primary thing you should be communicating is what your exit count is, particularly if you've never jumped with them before. But you should also be making your exit count really, really clear. And over the years, as I amassed more and more and more jumps, I became even more and more complacent with my exit count until I had an incident that was very similar to that. And following that, I now have the biggest, clearest exit count going. So you need to communicate with your camera flyer and check your hooks. Anything else that I've missed on any of those points?
Cool. With the student, with the hook.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the lateral coming undone, it looks like when you watch the video, the tandem instructor is set up in the door, and the camera flyer actually isn't in position. They have to squeeze past them.
Yeah.
So that looks like that could have been something that maybe the tandem instructors.
Yeah. And
so
one thing we need
going
to
out
be
of sequence as well.
Yeah.
You
And
know.
one thing that's typical on tandem courses is we don't always have people that are used to doing tandem video all the time. Quite often on tandem courses, we see a lot of people that are videoing for a little bit of practice. And I wonder if that might have been the case in this particular instance. I don't know. I don't want to propose that. It's also at a PTO where they hadn't jumped for a fairly long time. Is that Graham in the room? Anybody? Is that true? You hadn't jumped for a while? Skydive Island? It'd been a while since you jumped before that course, so everybody was fairly uncurrent.
Yeah, I think that's the video.
Yeah.
He hasn't done many times since that course.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think he's interested.
All right. Well, after an incident like that, I don't think I would be either. Okay, so moving on to canopy-related issues, and let's face it, biggest canopy-related issue is packing-related. So again, we see the usual suspects here. One thing that is a disturbing trend is there are 2 more pack rotations on a tandem kit, pack rotations. And this is a trend that we've seen over the last couple of years, where we've had 2 or 3 pack rotations every year. And there's a video of me jumping one last year. But the biggest suspects culprits are tension knots and twists. So when we looked at these figures last year, again, tension knots and twists. And this always brings up the debate. We usually get the tension knots on hops and the twists on Icarus canopies. So with tension knots, it wasn't hops this year. It was mainly Sigmas. And compared to last year, there was a lot more tension knots on Sigmas than traditionally we've seen. Will?
Do you have that as a percentage of how many jumps though? Because more people are using Sigmas, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a point I'm coming on to. It's very difficult. Oh, sorry, yeah. Oh, Will's question was about the percentage of jumps on Sigma. You're absolutely right. I mean, really, it's a statistic that needs more explanation. We don't have the figures on how many jumps are done on each particular canopy, so it's difficult to do that. But what I did last year is I went through all the audits that I'd done that year, and I looked at how many canopies were at particular DZs, and I extrapolated, which you should never do, the approximate number of jumps they did on those particular canopies, and what I came up with was these figures here. So it's not the actual rate, but we quite clearly do more jumps on Sigma and Icaruses. So we clearly see more incidents on those particular canopies, but they do seem prone. We do tend to see tension knots on hops, although we haven't seen it quite so much. Is anybody here from Chatteris? Anybody in the room? One reason why we're seeing less incidents on hops, I think, firstly, is headcorn stopped jumping them. I hope that's not a rude thing, but what I mean by that is there weren't so many jumps done on hops. Not that we have a lot of incidents at headcorn, Pete, sorry. But also Chatteris have changed the type of lines that they're using on the hops. So they actually have HMA lines on their hops, and they are definitely less prone to tension knots. But what we are still seeing is the incident of twists, and the old culprit is still Icarus. And for those of you that don't know, a TX2 is very much related to the Icarus. So we're still seeing twists, and these are twists that are defined not that we're spinning and diving, but twists that the instructor just could not kick out. How many people in the room here have jumped an Icarus or TX2 and experienced a twist you couldn't kick out of? So it's quite a common occurrence. So the same messages are I mean, actually, while I've got UPT here, what are some techniques with avoiding twists or tension knots? What's kind of the advice from UPT?
So I've got some good videos that I'm more than happy to share with you. We're now, as a function of dealing with that level of minor problem or nuisance factor, reluctant to teach spreading the risers and kicking out in favor of twisting the risers in your hand. Now, clearly there's a limit to how successful that can be. But it's both options are still available to the tandem instructor.
Yeah.
It's preferred, and I think more successful, to rotate the twists closer down to the 3 ring.
Yeah. And what about, we had a lot of, and it might have been isolated, but we seem to have a lot of tension knots on Sigmas this year. Have you got any advice on avoiding tension knots on Sigmas?
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a trend you've noticed, you picked up, you see, you know, the trends from all over the world.
It would be interesting to have further data points across all of the canopies that you've listed, actually, as in line condition, the total number of jumps, the environment, whether it's that kind of thing. We tend to see more tension knots in a dry, arid environment.
Yeah, like the UK.
Yeah, unlike the UK. So it's a really interesting stat. So I'd have to do some digging with Mark and with Bill.
Yeah, I mean, it's one we'll watch. I suspect it might be isolated. It might have been a function of the fact maybe packers were uncurrent. That might be a point that Pete's got for us.
So the subject of tension knots was discussed on one of the forums for riggers, and the suggestion came out from there that it's about the bulk of lines being held by the bungee. So basically, your bungees aren't tight enough because the inside lines haven't got any drag from the bungee. So actually just the drag factor of the bungee only works on the outside of the stack. So when you think about the lines on a Sigma, they're quite bulky. So there are lines inside which aren't touching a bungee at all. So their only friction is against the other lines themselves. So that's a fairly recent discussion on the forum. But it's definitely something that we know from PD that they kind of go, we want to have decent sized stows, and as a backer, you know, it's my thing. I always want to be able to get at least my thumb through the bite. Yeah. And I think when you think about how does a tension knot happen, one line is slapping around loose compared to the other lines. So if we're controlling them stripping off the bag, then we've got to be going part of the way towards it. Yeah. So tighter bungees, please. Thank you.
No, that's a brilliant piece of advice. That's not one I would have, both points were not ones I would have considered. There are some simple things that we can do to try and avoid tension knots and twists. We can take the twists out of the brake lines. It's one thing we all know, but on a busy day, do we all do? We can look at our packing. If there are trends at your PTO with a particular canopy, I'm sure if you all jump Sigma canopies, Neil will be delighted to talk to you about it. As well, and then you can have a more in-depth chat with Neil about things like line wear, types of line, that type of thing. And if you do see trends, obviously get it down in your SMS. Work with your chief instructor to try and look at arresting those trends. Anything else? Any other comments that anybody's got about twists or tension knots? Billy, can I grab the mic back? Sorry. Cheers, Pete. Thanks.
Yeah, I've got quite a controversial way of getting out twists on the canopy.
Okay.
Ones that you can't kick out of. So I don't know if I should tell everybody because it might put you in a worse situation.
Let's give it away. Let's see how controversial it is.
Okay.
And I will counterpoint it.
So what I tried one time was in twists that I couldn't get out of. I was kicking out of them, and was it Neil was saying before? You're kicking out one. You're kicking out. You start going out the twist, and then you end up back in it.
Yep.
Yeah. So I tried that a few times. It wasn't working. So I grabbed one of my steering toggles outside it, so I didn't have my hand all the way in it, in case I needed to let go of it quickly, and I pulled it very slowly through the twists. Yep. And that sent me into a turn, and as I went into that turn, it spun me out the twists, and I've done that about 3 times now, and it's got me out of twists, whereas I would have chopped it. Okay. So I don't know if that's something we should advertise.
You're absolutely right. With caution.
Yeah, exactly. And also you have to pull the right toggle as well, because it might send you the opposite way. So if you pull down very gently on one toggle and see that you're turning the wrong way, let go of that toggle, grab the other toggle and pull that one down a little bit further, nice and slowly. So if you have to let go of it in emergency, you can still release it and go through your emergency procedures. If you have to chop it, at least then you're not spinning out of control. You're only spinning very, very slowly. But that very slow spin just spins you the right way and gets you out the twists. Yeah. Like I said, that's helped me out 3 times, whereas I would have had 3 reserve rides. Yeah.
Thanks very much. And I missed the slide at the beginning that said that the views expressed might not necessarily be the views of British skydiving. So at your own risk. So moving on to injuries. So a really great thing is that the injuries are they're on a downward trend. But serious injuries are pretty much flatlined. So the line in red is those we consider serious, so i.e. category 2 upwards, and the blue line is those in total. Talking about the rates of injury, which is important. So our injury rate has gone from about 1 in 900 jumps to nearly 1 in 2,000 jumps. So that's total injuries. In terms of serious injuries, again, we've seen a similar trend. So back in 2014, we experienced an injury roughly every 3,000 jumps. Now we're seeing it every 4,000 jumps. But note for the last 3 years that trend we have had has been better. But it's as I've been talking to Dr. Carter, we don't just look in small periods like 2 or 3 years. It's better to look over general trends over lots of years. But certainly, the injury trend over the last 10 years is definitely good. One thing that is of concern, particularly some of you might have heard that there are increasing movements by the Health and Safety Executive to get involved in investigating certainly skydiving fatalities that are related to work or injuries that are related to work, that we also had 4 injuries to tandem instructors as well. One of those was a broken ankle. The other 4 were aches, pains and strains as they were tightening the tandem student up. So again, if I can ask all of you just to look after yourselves, make sure your own, because we tend to focus on student injuries and not injuries to ourselves. We need to look after each other. So a lot of you make your living out of skydiving. Good news about shoulder dislocations. Again, we're looking at a fairly micro scale, but we halved the number of shoulder dislocations that we had last year. And I think that's down in part, I've been to PTOs, I've audited tandem lessons, and I've heard anecdotal evidence that we are mentioning shoulder dislocations in tandem briefings. We are paying attention to the medical, and we are doing a lot better at highlighting the risk of shoulder dislocations in freefall. And I would please beg you to continue that. I'm not just going to go, great, we've halved shoulder dislocations, let's move on. We need to continue the work that we're doing with that. There are going to be some changes to the tandem medical that Anna, that Jake, and a couple of other doctors as well have been instrumental in doing, which should make the risk a lot clearer, that there is a risk of dislocation if you have a history of shoulder dislocations. We're going to look at a couple of injuries now, and this is the point. Can I just have the big thumbs up from the AV people that you're not recording? The reason why I'm showing this and we are not recording it is because it's very likely that at least one of these injuries is likely to result in a legal claim against British Skydiving. And you need to have this in mind when we're talking about injury trends and we're looking at injuries, is that injuries have a real effect on people's lives. How many people here are self-employed? Okay, without any form of health insurance, so that if we do get injured, or even if you're not self-employed, you work for someone else, breaking a femur, injuring your tib or fibula could mean that you are off work for a period of time. And if you are self-employed and you are off work for a protracted period of time, that could result in real financial difficulties for your family. It can have a massive effect. I'm going to talk about age as a factor in injuries. The older you are, and particularly you'll get to a certain age, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anna, it is harder for your bones to heal. And when we're jumping with tandem students, we need to have that as a consideration.
So what we're asking of the tandem instructors now is to approach our feet with a pitch, roll, and yaw type approach, meaning that the feet should be flat relative to the floor, toes should be pointing forward, and they should be the first thing to land. So pointing toes definitely in a soft landing area isn't going to help you. Digging the heels in certainly isn't going to help you either. From the yaw perspective, if we catch our toes, particularly in a desert environment, California, Arizona, and there's rocks or any debris, then we're likely to hurt ourselves. So, and I'm told, I'm surrounded by doctors, but from a biomechanical standpoint, that makes sense to approach it in a pitch, roll and yaw type perspective, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the narrative that we're trying to put forward, certainly on the UPT side. But the biggest takeaway point is that the instructor must make contact with the ground first. Sweet.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that one as well, it's looked like, because he has turned a little bit low when he's on brakes, it's like he's doing an accuracy landing on his own.
The first one,
you know, rather than flying it in to have those legs to take him forward with a slide-in thing. You know, he's deep on brakes, near enough.
Yep. No, all good points. Okay, so as I was discussing, there are always two things that we pay attention to when we look at injury rates, and that's age and BMI. I would certainly consider that they are two of the largest factors in injury. In data that we got from all the provisional memberships, when you buy a provisional membership from British Skydiving to do a tandem, you have to declare your height, age, and weight. And we know that the largest age group that came and did a tandem were age 16 to 39. That makes perfect sense, but the data certainly backs it up. However, in terms of injuries, so that age group is the 16 to 39 is the proportion marked in green. So it doesn't represent the similar kind of proportion that we see in injuries. The really disturbing thing is the age group marked in red, the 70 plus age group. And you have to always be careful when you're looking at statistics, when you're looking at small numbers, because we are only looking at small numbers. We only jumped 600 people, approximately 600 people last year who were aged 70 plus. And yet we had 3 injuries to people who were 70 plus. 2 of them were category 3 injuries. So we really have to consider age when we're jumping with students of that particular age group. And when we look at the risk of injury, so the number of injuries that we have compared to the number of jumps that we do, so we've got a risk of injury of about 1 injury every 4,000 jumps. But when we look at for the 16 to 39 age group, but when we look at the rate for the 70 plus, and again, we have to take it with a pinch of salt, but I still don't think we can discard this statistic. We have a 1 in 200, an injury every 200 jumps for people of that age group, and a serious injury 1 every 300 jumps. So they're figures that we can't really ignore. And as you get older, you are, according to these statistics, much more likely to have an injury. The other factor is BMI. So most people can be considered to have a BMI in the normal range. Anna, remind me, what's the normal range for BMI?
19 to 25.
19 to 25. And so we tend to jump, and I think it is, you know, indicative of society that people are starting to get bigger. And every year we do this statistic, the top statistic, that part of the graph is definitely getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But again, if we look at the injuries to those people, again, you see green, the normal body rate. It isn't the same proportion of the injuries compared to the number of people that jump in that particular group. And then if we look again at the obese, the overweight, and the very overweight, we see a disproportionate number of injuries for people in those particular categories. So you are 2 to 3 times more likely to hurt yourself if you are outside the normal BMI. So as tandem instructors, you know, we need to be aware of that. So these are the types of injuries that we've had, and Ryan this morning was talking about a shoulder that dislocated. It wasn't actually a shoulder; it was an elbow joint that dislocated. It's one of the headline injuries that we had. This person had an elbow replacement and hadn't declared it on their. They had a self-declaration form, and the elbow replacement failed in freefall and was flapping around, and that's what Ryan was talking about the arm flapping around in freefall, and that was really quite serious. So again, when we're talking to our students in the briefing, it is important. They may have read it, they may be hiding it, but it really have to emphasize to the students that if they have a previous history of dislocations or any medical issues that they have not declared, they need to come and speak to an instructor. So 15 of our injuries went to hospital, 2 by ambulance and 2 by air ambulance. And again, when we're talking about injuries, one of the things that we have to bear in mind is that hospital waits are probably the highest they've ever been. Is that fair, Anna, at the moment? Are they still really bad at A&E?
They are, on their arse.
So somebody could go to hospital because their shoulder's dislocated and be there for hours and hours and hours and hours. If they've injured themselves, they might be there for hours and hours and hours in pain. Anybody here from Sibson? So at Sibson, they actually have Penthrox there, which is a form of pain relief, because they've recognised this. Because when students and skydivers get injured, it could be a long, long time before they get to medical care or any form of pain relief. So that might be something to have a chat with Mark Harris at Sibson about doing that there. But we need to consider the conditions that we do. Sorry, go on, Dane.
Doc Carter might be able to answer on this one. No, but okay. No, I don't mean that. I mean, right.
You are the keeper of the statistics.
Because I'm a paramedic working in the security industry. And a couple of years ago, we had an incident with CNN where someone gave them medication that wasn't a doctor. Although we had the license to do that as paramedic, they took them to the court and they lost. So all our licenses for that, giving out drugs or anything, including paracetamol or ibuprofen. So you need to let your DZs know if they've got medical kit, unless you're a doctor, you cannot give them paracetamol. You cannot give them ibuprofen. But what you can say, look, I can't give you this, but that's where the box, I'm not going to stop you. You know, you've got to do it that way. Otherwise, if they have an allergic reaction to it, anaphylactic shock or anything like that, you will be taken to court and you will lose.
Yeah.
So you need to get that out.
That's a very important point, particularly with waits for ambulances and hospitals, you know, getting longer and longer. So we need to be aware of the conditions that we're jumping in. We do need to be aware of the fact that students do drop their legs on landing, but we need to look at ourselves first. We need to look at our own. And again, when I was talking about reviewing our exits, and it sounds like quite a few of us review our exits, review our free fall, it's the same with landings as well. How many people look at their videos of their landings after the jump? I do, every opportunity that I do, particularly as I'm not particularly current at the moment. So review your landings as well. But definitely harness test. I mean, how many people here are from PTOs that harness test every single student, so put them in a hanging harness? So if you're from a PTO that doesn't, maybe take that back as an example of best practice. But certainly those that are older and those with higher BMIs, they're definitely people that we need to be at harness testing. Yeah, most places do. Most places do now, and that's definitely best practice. Limit the conditions that people jump in, particularly in those high-risk areas. So if it's a nil-wind day, do you really want to be taking, I probably said it at the last one, one of the hardest things I ever had to do was say to someone that was 94 years old that unfortunately I wasn't going to be able to take them to skydiving because it was a really hot day with nil winds and there was just too much, there was baked hard ground. It was just too much of a risk. There wasn't enough wind for me to mitigate the risk of taking that person that age. He had about 40 people coming. He'd raised hundreds of thousands of pounds for charity. Absolutely. One of the hardest things I ever had to do was tell him no. But we as instructors have to know when to say no and have the confidence to be able to say no as well, because heaven forbid I broke that guy in front of the 40 people that had raised £200,000 for charity. Choose the right canopy for the conditions as well. If you have the choice of canopies to take, and let's be honest, amongst the fleet at most PTOs, we've got the good canopies and we've got the canopies that perhaps, you know, other people need to be jumping. Mention dislocations in a brief, and as I mentioned, know when to say no. Any other points to add on that? I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to race through off landings. So off landings are on the way off. If you are going to have an off landing, use the 5 S's, which I'll talk about in the last tandem seminar if you want to know more, a little bit more about that. But has anybody got any questions, any other comments? Going to cut it there. Brilliant. All right, so thank you all for coming. Hopefully the first ever full day on a Friday has been interesting. I hope you found it useful. We've tried something new. Do give us feedback on how you found all of the sessions. But most importantly, stay safe, stay classy. All right, thank you very much. All right, has anybody got any questions, anything you want to ask, just come up and we'll take it from there.
They're on the table. Tell them about the certificate.